Joining me now to talk more about all of this, both sides of the aisle, Republican strategist Boyd Matheson. He's also the former chief of staff to Senator Mike Lee of Utah and a radio host in Salt Lake City. Boyd, good morning to you. So the New York Times headline, "Why Robert Kennedy Jr.'s 2024 bid is a headache for President Biden." Does RFK pose a real threat to the president?
I don't know if it's a real threat, but it is a real headache to be sure. I think the longer he stays in the race and the longer he's able to build up a little bit of momentum by those who are saying, yeah, maybe President Biden doesn't quite have what it takes. Maybe he's kind of faltering a little bit. The longer that goes, the harder and the more complicated it gets, both for the president and for the Democratic Party. That's something really interesting to watch. For the president, obviously, if he has to go on a debate stage, if there's enough momentum where people will call for that debate to happen, will the Democratic Party try to protect the president, or will they try to use a debate as an opportunity to show, hey, he really is the one that's in charge, he is the one leading? And so it'll be very interesting messaging. You mentioned the president talking about Bidenomics today. That's going to be a very interesting sell to the American people, because often the president's trying to tout something in terms of his legislative accomplishments, but it's not really congruent with what the American people are feeling at home. And so that's a challenge, and that's an opportunity for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to say, look, the president's saying one thing, but everyone I talk to across the country is feeling something different. So maybe that change in leadership is what they're after. We know that sitting presidents who have long battles don't do typically well, even if they secure the nomination, which I would assume President Biden will get in the end. But if he goes in damaged goods going into the fall, that makes it really tough, a la Jimmy Carter or George H.W. Bush.
Right. On the economy right now, about 33% approve of the president's leadership on the economy. So as he talks about Bidenomics this morning, you have to know where the American public's heads are. Also, to your point, Boyd, an incumbent president has not lost their primaries nomination in modern U.S. history. But I wonder, and some argue this, that RFK Jr.'s involvement here is a useful weapon for the GOP. So if you're sitting strategizing on the Republican side, you're thinking this might be a good thing to muddy the waters.
Yeah, that's right. There's the old axiom, never get in the way of your opponents making a big mistake or having a big fight. This is where the Republicans can pop some popcorn, encourage Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to continue his message. And his message is interesting, Marni, and it is resonating with a good chunk of the Democratic Party. Not so much the base of the party, but some of those center-left folks are saying, wait a minute, maybe there is something there that is worth considering and looking at. And I think that'll be the big test, is if he can add to that and get some real momentum on the ground, because it will come down to places like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, which are those early states for the Democrats, where he'll have to show that he can actually deliver on a primary election day.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I promise we're going to talk about the Republicans here in a moment. But the Democrats want to see South Carolina first up, right? They kind of want to move past Iowa and New Hampshire and the importance of those states historically in an election. If they are successful in doing that, Biden might not be on the ballot in those two states. How impactful might something like that be?
It could be a big deal. And obviously the president wants to start in South Carolina because that is what delivered him the nomination in 2020. No question about it. He likes South Carolina. He's done well there, and he wants that momentum. And so the fact that the sitting president could actually not even be on the ballot in Iowa and New Hampshire is at least an interesting conversation for the country to be looking at, as to why is he avoiding those conversations and just staying in kind of that home territory of South Carolina.
All right, New Hampshire for a moment, and the clock is ticking. I have less than a minute here, Boyd. Trump is leading in New Hampshire in the polls right now, about 47%. That's according to a St. Anselm poll of New Hampshire Republican voters. DeSantis right now, right around 19%. Trump says that I'd have to work really hard to blow this one. Is there too much ground for DeSantis to make up, or any other candidate? We've got Pence on the screen now.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting movement going on. So top of the charts in terms of the polling, again, not the ground game, the polling is clearly the former president and Governor DeSantis. One of the things I'm watching underneath the poll, new NBC poll, had an interesting thing about who is your second choice. Sometimes the path to finishing first starts with being second. And right now there has been a huge jump in the people who asked, who is your second choice? And Tim Scott from South Carolina took a 9-point jump between April and June in being everyone's second choice. He also has a real upside. There's still about 35% of those folks who don't know enough about him. So he both has some stretch upside, But it's that underneath. If you have in New Hampshire, we've obviously seen dueling events between the former president and the governor of Florida. If they continue to battle at each other, it may create space for a Pence, for a Tim Scott, for a Nikki Haley to be the second choice. And again, sometimes being that second choice is a really good path that ended up first in the end.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.